He was 1 second away from calling the police on the poor young nanny he thought was hurting his sons. But the security footage showed something that broke him instead. His 1-year-old boy, the child doctors said might never walk, was standing, shaking, reaching, and the person he trusted most in his mansion was the one who had been lying all along. Sometimes the greatest danger in a rich home isn't poverty. It's the fear that turns love into control. If stories about family, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, take a moment to subscribe. This channel is a place where love always finds its way home. Graham Whitmore told everyone he was flying to Chicago for a 3-day business conference. His private driver dropped him at the airport. His assistant confirmed the itinerary. His company board believed their CEO was 30,000 feet in the air. But 10 minutes later, Graham Whitmore slipped quietly through the side entrance of his own mansion like a stranger breaking into his own life. Since his wife Diane passed away the year before, everything in Graham's world had changed. The laughter was gone. The warmth was gone. And in its place, he built something else. Order. Schedules taped inside kitchen cabinets. Feeding times measured to the minute. Nap logs. Temperature checks. Sanitized toys arranged like museum pieces. Even the air inside the house felt controlled. Quiet. Careful. Untouched. Because if everything stayed perfect, nothing else could be taken from him. But perfection came with a cost. In 6 months, he had fired 4 nannies. 1 for arriving 5 minutes late. 1 for checking her phone while warming a bottle. 1 because she cried when the twins wouldn't stop screaming. And 1 simply because she laughed too loudly in a house that was still grieving. Then came Chloe. She was young. Maybe 24. No fancy childcare degree. No polished resume from wealthy families. She came from a poor neighborhood on the south side. Her shoes were worn. Her hands looked like she'd worked hard most of her life. And according to Mrs. Hargrove, the Whitmore family housekeeper for 15 years, she was the wrong kind of girl. That morning, Mrs. Hargrove had leaned close to Graham in the kitchen, her voice soft, concerned, almost motherly. "Sir, I don't like what I'm seeing." Graham had looked up slowly. "The boys don't cry when you leave," she continued. "Babies always cry when their father goes. If they don't, something isn't right." Graham felt a slow burn in his chest. "What are you saying?" Mrs. Hargrove lowered her voice. "I'm saying she might be giving them something. Or scaring them into silence. Poor girls like her. They don't always understand boundaries." That was all it took. Grief makes a man protective. Control makes him suspicious. And fear makes him believe the worst. So Graham planned a test. He packed a briefcase. Announced his trip. Let the car drive away. Then came back. The night before, he had oiled the locks himself. No squeak. No warning. No chance for anyone inside to prepare. In his mind, he would walk into neglect. A television blaring. His sons ignored. Maybe Chloe scrolling her phone. Maybe worse. He stepped inside the marble foyer and closed the door behind him without a sound. Then he stood still, listening. No crying. No television. No bottles clinking. Just silence. The kind of silence he had forced into this house since Diane died. He set the briefcase down slowly. And then he heard it. Laughter. Deep, wild, breathless laughter. Not one child. 2. Owen and Caleb. His sons hadn't laughed like that in almost a year. Graham froze. The sound came from the living room. For a moment, he didn't move. Something twisted inside him. If they're this happy without me, what does that mean? His jaw tightened. Curiosity pushed him forward, but something else held him back. Fear. because the laughter didn't sound forced. It didn't sound nervous. It sounded safe. He moved down the hallway slowly, each step quiet against the polished floor. With every step, Mrs. Hargrove's words echoed in his mind. Too young. Too loud. Too careless. Poor girls like her don't know their place. The laughter grew louder. And somewhere deep inside, another thought pressed in. What if she's giving them something I can't? He reached the edge of the living room and stopped. Sunlight filled the space. And the room that was usually spotless looked alive. Toys scattered across the rug. Blocks tipped over. A stuffed elephant lying upside down like it had survived a storm. And in the center of it all, Chloe. She was lying flat on her back on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, laughing. On her hands were bright yellow rubber cleaning gloves. Standing on her stomach and chest were Owen and Caleb. The boys wobbled like tiny mountain climbers, their little arms stretched out for balance. Up, my brave boys! Chloe cheered. You're strong. You're giants. Owen threw both arms in the air and squealed. Caleb trembled, his legs shaking, but he was standing. Caleb! The twin doctors were worried about. The one who still refused to stand on his own. He was upright, laughing. To anyone else, it looked like love. To Graham Whitmore, millionaire, widower, a man holding his grief like armor, it looked like chaos. His face went hot. His heart pounded. His perfect house. His fragile sons. A poor young nanny turning his living room into a playground. Chloe. His voice cut through the room like a blade. And in that instant, the laughter stopped. Caleb turned his head too quickly. His balance shifted. His tiny legs gave out. And he began to fall. But before Graham could move, Chloe moved faster. One arm caught Caleb mid-air. Her other hand grabbed Owen at the waist, pulling both boys safely against her chest. She sat up in one smooth motion, holding them close as their laughter turned into startled cries. Graham stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger he couldn't control. "What do you think you're doing in my house?" And as Chloe looked up at him, still holding both boys tight, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear. Not guilt. Something else. Something that made Graham uncomfortable before he even understood why. And down the hallway, just out of sight, Mrs. Hargrove was watching. The twins' cries filled the room, sharp and confused, their little hands clutching at Chloe's shirt as if she were the only solid thing left in their world. Graham stepped closer, his anger rising faster than his reason. "Put them down," he said, his voice low but tight with control. "Right now." Chloe didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. Slowly, carefully, she eased Owen toward the couch, then guided Caleb to sit beside his brother. Her movements were gentle, practiced, the kind of calm that came from someone used to handling small storms. The moment her hands left them, both boys started crying harder. Owen reached for her. Caleb twisted his body, his small arms stretching toward her like he was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. Graham's jaw clenched. That reaction hit him harder than the scene he had walked into. He stepped forward and picked Owen up, holding him against his chest. "It's okay," he said quickly, the words sounding stiff even to his own ears. "Daddy's here." But Owen didn't calm down. The crying turned louder, more desperate. His little fists pushed against Graham's suit, his face turning away, searching over Graham's shoulder. "For Chloe." Caleb's crying rose to match his brother's, his body arching as he tried to slide off the couch. Graham felt heat creep up his neck. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he snapped, turning toward Chloe. "You've made them dependent on you. You've turned them into this." Chloe swallowed, her hands hanging at her sides. "They're scared," she said softly. "You came in angry. Babies feel that. "This is not a discussion," Graham cut in. "This house runs on discipline. Not chaos. Not games." His eyes moved across the room, the toys on the floor, the sunlight, the life that didn't belong to the quiet world he had built. "This is not a playground," he added. Chloe's voice stayed calm, but there was something steady in it now. "They were laughing, sir." The words landed heavier than she intended. For a second, the room went still except for the twins crying. Graham looked at her, his expression hard. "Laughter isn't the priority," he said. "Safety is. Structure is." He bounced Owen awkwardly, trying to copy something he'd seen other fathers do, but the boy only cried harder. Caleb slid off the couch and wobbled toward Chloe, his legs unsteady, his arms reaching. Chloe took one small step forward. Graham's voice stopped her. "Don't." She froze. Caleb's knees buckled. He dropped to the carpet and cried, frustrated and frightened. Graham bent to pick him up, but the child twisted away, his little hands pushing against his father's chest like he didn't recognize the arms holding him. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Graham's face. He looked between the boys, both crying, both reaching past him. Toward her. The moment stretched. Then his expression hardened again. "That's enough," he said quietly. "Go to your room. Pack your things." Chloe blinked once, like she hadn't heard him right. "Sir, you're done here." The words fell heavy in the air. She looked at the twins. Owen was still crying, his hands opening and closing toward her. Caleb had turned his whole body in her direction, his face wet and desperate. For a second, Chloe didn't move. Then she nodded. "Yes, sir." She walked past them slowly, her steps careful, like every movement hurt. The moment she disappeared down the hallway, the crying changed. It wasn't frustration anymore. It was panic. Owen screamed, his whole body shaking. Caleb began coughing between sobs, the sound wet and strained, the kind that made Graham's stomach tighten. "Hey, hey," Graham said quickly, trying to hold both of them. "It's okay. I've got you." But nothing worked. He rocked them. He paced. He whispered every soothing word he could think of. The crying only grew louder, echoing off the high ceilings. And suddenly, the house didn't feel calm anymore. It felt empty, and loud, and out of control. "Sir." The voice came from behind him. Mrs. Hargrove stood in the doorway, her posture straight, her expression composed, as if the chaos in the room were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "I was afraid this might happen," she said gently. Graham looked at her, sweat at his temples. "They won't stop," he said, his voice tight. "What did she do to them?" Mrs. Hargrove stepped closer, her tone soft, reassuring. "She spoiled them," she said. "Too much holding. Too much attention. Poor girls don't understand boundaries. They think affection replaces discipline." Caleb coughed again, his face turning blotchy as he cried. Graham's grip tightened. "They've never been like this," he muttered. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes moved toward the hallway where Chloe had gone. "She made herself their comfort," she said quietly. "Girls like that, they like to feel needed. It gives them power." The words settled into the cracks already forming in Graham's mind. "They'll adjust," she continued smoothly. "Children forget quickly. What matters is that the right person is guiding them." Graham nodded slowly, though the sound of his son's crying made the motion feel uncertain. Down the hallway, a door closed. The sound was soft, but both boys reacted instantly. Owen's crying turned into desperate sobs. Caleb stretched his arms toward the hallway again, his whole body leaning in that direction. Graham stood frozen in the middle of his own living room, holding two children who felt like strangers in his arms. And for the first time since Diane died, a quiet, uncomfortable thought slipped into his mind. What if the problem wasn't the nanny? The thought unsettled him enough that he couldn't ignore it. Graham stood there for a long moment, the weight of both boys pulling at his arms, their cries still raw and desperate. Caleb's small body trembled against his chest, his breath hitching between coughs. Owen's fingers twisted into the fabric of Graham's sleeve, but his eyes kept searching the hallway. Not for comfort. For someone else. Graham swallowed hard. "Why won't you calm down?" he whispered, more to himself than to them. He tried rocking again, slower this time. Tried softening his voice. Tried to loosen the stiffness in his shoulders. Nothing changed. Across the room, Mrs. Hargrove watched quietly, her hands folded, her expression patient. "They need structure, sir," she said gently. "If you give in now, they'll only get worse." Graham nodded automatically, though the words didn't sit right. Caleb coughed again, harder this time. His little face flushed deep red, his breath catching in sharp bursts. Instinct finally pushed past pride. "Water," Graham said quickly. Mrs. Hargrove moved at once, returning with a small cup. Graham tried to guide it to Caleb's lips, but the boy turned his face away, crying harder, his hands pushing weakly at his father's wrist. "He never does this," Graham muttered. Mrs. Hargrove tilted her head slightly. "Because she carried him all the time," she replied. "He's used to being held a certain way." The words lingered. Graham shifted Caleb, trying to adjust his hold. He remembered, suddenly, the way Chloe had cradled the boy earlier. Not tight, not stiff, close, but relaxed. He hesitated. Then, awkwardly, he changed his grip, letting Caleb rest against his shoulder instead of upright against his chest. For a second, nothing happened. Then the coughing eased. Not gone, but softer. Graham froze. Caleb's breathing slowly steadied, his small hand clutching the lapel of Graham's jacket instead of pushing it away. The crying didn't stop completely, but the panic began to fade into tired sobs. Graham felt something shift inside his chest. He looked down at the boy, really looked this time. Not a problem to manage. Not a routine to follow. Just a scared child who needed to feel safe. Across the room, Owen's crying had quieted too. He sat on the couch, still sniffling, his eyes heavy, his thumb finding its way to his mouth. The house grew quieter. Not peaceful, but fragile. Mrs. Hargrove stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You see," she said softly. "Consistency. That's what matters." Graham didn't answer. Because something about the moment didn't feel like consistency. It felt like copying. Like he had just borrowed something he didn't understand. His eyes moved toward the hallway again. Toward the closed door. A long silence passed before he spoke. "Make sure she's packed," he said finally. Mrs. Hargrove nodded and turned to go. But before she could leave the room, Owen suddenly pulled his thumb from his mouth and said something through his lingering tears. It wasn't clear. Just one small sound. "Nah." Graham looked at him. Owen tried again, his voice shaky. "Nah, nah." The word hung in the air. Not Daddy. Not a cry. A name. Mrs. Hargrove paused at the doorway. "They'll forget," she said quickly. "Children attach easily. And they detach just as easily." But Graham wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his son. Because Owen wasn't crying now. He was reaching. Toward the hallway. Again. Mrs. Hargrove stepped out. The room fell quiet except for Caleb's soft breathing against Graham's shoulder. Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. The boys grew heavy with exhaustion. Owen curled up on the couch, finally drifting into sleep. Caleb's grip loosened as he dozed against Graham, his breath warm and uneven. For the first time that afternoon, the mansion was still. Graham lowered himself slowly onto the couch, careful not to wake them. He sat there, not moving, not checking his phone, not thinking about meetings or numbers or schedules, just listening to the quiet. And in that quiet, memories began to surface. Diane on the living room floor, her hair falling into her face as she laughed with the boys. Diane ignoring the mess. Diane saying once, "Kids don't need perfect, Graham. They need present." At the time, he had smiled and gone back to his emails. Now the memory felt heavier. From down the hallway came the faint sound of a zipper closing. Graham's eyes lifted. A moment later, Mrs. Hargrove returned. "She's ready to leave," she said. Her tone was calm, efficient, final. Graham nodded slowly. He shifted Caleb carefully, laying him beside Owen. Both boys slept close together, their hands touching without even knowing it. Graham stood. For a second, he hesitated. Then he walked toward the hallway. Each step felt slower than the last. At the end of the service corridor, the door to the small staff room stood open. Chloe was inside. Her worn duffel bag sat on the bed. A few folded clothes rested beside it. She moved quietly, carefully, like someone who had already accepted the outcome. She didn't look up when he appeared in the doorway. "Are you finished?" Graham asked. Her hands paused for just a second. "Yes, sir," she said softly. Her voice didn't carry anger or pleading, just tired dignity. Graham's eyes moved around the small room. Then something on the wall caught his attention. A crayon drawing. Crooked lines. 2 circles. Bright colors pressed too hard into the paper. And underneath it, in careful block letters written by an adult hand, "Owen." Graham stared at it. Then slowly, his gaze shifted back to Chloe. "You were keeping this?" he asked. Chloe finally looked at him. Her eyes were red, but steady. "He gave it to me," she said quietly. The room went still. And for reasons he didn't fully understand. That simple answer made something in Graham's chest tighten. Graham stepped into the room slowly, the space feeling smaller the closer he got to that piece of paper on the wall. Up close, the drawing looked even simpler. 2 uneven circles, one larger than the other. Lines shooting out like tiny arms. Bright green and blue pressed into the paper so hard the crayon had left dents. Childish, messy, and cared for. Chloe had taped the edges carefully so it wouldn't curl. "He's 1 year old," Graham said quietly, though the words came out sharper than he intended. "He doesn't know what he's giving." Chloe folded the last shirt into her bag before answering. "Maybe not," she said. "But I know what it means to him." Graham frowned slightly. "And what's that?" She hesitated, then met his eyes. "It means he wanted someone to see what he made." The words settled into the air between them. Graham looked back at the drawing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd noticed anything like that. Schedules, medical reports, growth charts. He knew their weight to the ounce. But their drawings? Their little moments? His gaze dropped. "That doesn't change anything," he said after a moment, his voice returning to its controlled tone. "This arrangement isn't working." Chloe nodded once. No argument. "I understand." There was no bitterness in her voice. That made it harder. She reached up and carefully peeled the tape from the wall. The paper bent slightly as she took it down. For a second, it looked like she might fold it. Instead, she smoothed it flat and placed it gently inside the side pocket of her duffel. Graham watched the movement. "Leave it," he said suddenly. Chloe paused. "It belongs to the family." She looked at him, confused. "He gave it to me." Graham stepped closer and held out his hand. After a long second, she slid the drawing out and gave it to him. The paper felt thin, fragile, warmer than he expected. He didn't know what to do with it, so he folded it once and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had been said. Chloe lifted her bag onto her shoulder. "I'll go out through the service entrance," she said quietly. "I don't want to wake the boys." Graham nodded. She walked past him, careful not to brush against his arm. But as she reached the doorway, she stopped. For a moment, she didn't turn around. Then she spoke. "Sir, can I say one thing?" Graham didn't answer right away. Then he gave a small nod. Chloe turned slowly. Her eyes were tired, but steady. "They're not difficult children," she said. "They're scared." Graham's expression tightened. "They lost their mother," she continued gently. "And then the house got quiet. Too quiet." He looked away. "They don't need perfect," she went on. "They need someone who sits on the floor. Someone who laughs with them. Someone who lets the house feel alive again." Her voice softened. "They don't need more rules. They need more warmth." Graham felt something push against his chest, something uncomfortable and familiar. Guilt. "I didn't come here to be their mother," Chloe added quickly. "I know my place." She swallowed. "But they need a parent who isn't afraid to love them out loud." The words landed harder than any accusation. Graham's jaw tightened. "You're speaking beyond your role," he said quietly. Chloe nodded. "I know." She adjusted the strap on her bag. "But sometimes poor people see things rich people don't have time to notice." The room went still. There was no disrespect in her tone, just truth. She turned again and walked down the hallway. Her footsteps were soft, measured, final. Graham stood in the doorway long after she disappeared around the corner. Then he heard the back door open. And close. The sound echoed through the house like something leaving for good. He stayed there another minute. Two. Then he walked slowly back toward the living room. The house felt different now. Not quiet. Empty. When he entered the room, the boys were still asleep on the couch, curled toward each other. He sat down carefully beside them. For a long time, he just watched them breathe. Their faces were peaceful. Their hands rested close together, fingers occasionally twitching in sleep. Without thinking, Graham loosened his tie. Then he took off his jacket and set it aside. The crayon drawing slipped from the pocket and landed beside him. He picked it up, stared at it, then looked at his sons. Something in his chest tightened again. From the hallway, quiet footsteps approached. Mrs. Hargrove appeared, her expression composed as always. "She's gone," she said. Graham nodded slowly. Mrs. Hargrove glanced at the boys. "They'll settle back into routine," she said reassuringly. "In a few days, it'll be like she was never here." Graham didn't respond. He was still looking at the drawing. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes followed his gaze. Then she spoke carefully. "There is one more matter you should know about, sir." Graham looked up. Her voice lowered. "I checked your office earlier." A pause. The safe was open. Graham's expression changed instantly. "What?" Mrs. Hargrove stepped closer. "The diamond butterfly brooch," she said quietly. "The one that belonged to Mrs. Whitmore." Her eyes met his. "It's missing." The room suddenly felt colder. Graham stood slowly. "That safe stays locked," he said. Mrs. Hargrove nodded. "Yes, sir." A heavy silence passed. Then she added, very softly, "And the only person who's been in that part of the house today was Chloe." Graham looked toward the hallway. The back entrance. The door she had just walked out of. His hand tightened around the crayon drawing. And for the first time since she left, Doubt turned into something darker. The crayon paper crinkled slightly in Graham's fist. For a long moment he didn't move. The words echoed in his head. The butterfly brooch. Diane's brooch. The last gift he had given her on their anniversary. A delicate piece of white diamonds shaped like wings, something she used to wear only on special days. After she passed, he had locked it away himself. Not for its value, for its memory. And now it was gone. "You're sure?" Graham asked quietly. Mrs. Hargrove nodded, her expression calm but concerned. "I went to place the documents you asked for on your desk. The safe door was slightly open. I checked inside." She lowered her voice. "It wasn't there." Graham's jaw tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air heavier. His eyes moved toward the hallway again. Toward the back of the house. Toward the exit Chloe had used just minutes earlier. "She was near your office this morning," Mrs. Hargrove added carefully. "I saw her coming from that corridor after nap time." Graham didn't answer. His mind was moving fast now. Young. Poor. No references from wealthy families. A worn bag. A life that probably ran on bills and survival. And a diamond brooch worth more than she would earn in years. The thought came quietly. Maybe the laughter, the kindness, the patience. Maybe that had all been part of the act. His chest tightened. "Call security," he said finally. Mrs. Hargrove didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." She stepped out, already reaching for her phone. Graham stood there alone for a second. Then he looked down. The crayon drawing was still in his hand. The bright green lines. The pressed blue circles. A gift. He stared at it longer than he meant to. Then slowly, he set it on the table beside the couch. Because right now, there were bigger problems. Minutes later, the head of security confirmed that Chloe had already left the property. Her name and photo were being circulated. Her address was on file from employment paperwork. They could send someone. Graham ended the call. His stomach felt tight. Anger sat there. But something else sat beside it. Discomfort. He didn't like how fast this was moving. He didn't like how certain Mrs. Hargrove had sounded. But the safe had been open. And the brooch was missing. Across the room, Owen stirred. A small whimper escaped him. Graham walked over and sat beside the boys again. Caleb shifted in his sleep, his hand searching blindly until it found his brother's sleeve. Even in sleep, they reached for each other. Graham watched them for a long time. Then a quiet sound pulled his attention. Footsteps. Mrs. Hargrove returned, her expression composed. "Security is handling it," she said gently. "They'll locate her." Graham nodded once. Mrs. Hargrove stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm sorry, sir. I know this must feel like another loss." Her words landed carefully, exactly where grief lived. "Sometimes people from difficult backgrounds," she continued softly, "they see opportunity where trust is given." Graham's hands tightened. "She seemed devoted," Mrs. Hargrove added. "But desperation makes people do things." The silence that followed felt heavy. Then suddenly, Caleb coughed. A sharp, wet cough. Graham leaned down quickly, lifting him. The boy's face tightened, his breath catching between small gasps. "Easy," Graham murmured, adjusting him. But Caleb's body stiffened. Another cough. Then another. The sound turned panicked. Graham's pulse jumped. He remembered. The way Chloe had held him. The way she had said small circles on the back. Without thinking, he shifted Caleb against his shoulder and began rubbing slowly, gently, just like she had shown him earlier. 1 circle. 2. 3. The coughing eased. Not gone. But softer. Caleb's breathing slowly steadied, his small body relaxing against Graham's chest. The room grew quiet again. Mrs. Hargrove watched from a distance. "Poor thing," she said. "He's very attached to routine." Graham didn't answer. Because it hadn't been routine that helped. It had been something he learned from her. From the woman he had just accused of stealing from him. The thought unsettled him. Mrs. Hargrove stepped closer again. "There's one more thing you should consider," she said carefully. Graham looked up. Her eyes moved briefly toward the hallway, then back to him. "The office corridor camera," she said. "It hasn't been working for 2 days." Graham's expression changed. "What?" "I reported it to maintenance," she said. "They were scheduled to fix it tomorrow." A quiet pause. "That area wouldn't show who went in or out today." The words settled slowly. No camera. No proof. Only suspicion. Graham looked down at Caleb, now resting quietly against him. Then he looked toward the hallway again. Toward the path Chloe had taken when she left. Something didn't sit right. He couldn't explain it. But the picture felt incomplete. "Pull the rest of the footage," he said suddenly. Mrs. Hargrove blinked. "Sir." "All cameras. Every hallway. Every entrance. The last 24 hours. Her expression tightened for just a fraction of a second. Then she nodded. "Of course." She turned and walked out. Graham stayed where he was, holding Caleb, watching Owen sleep beside them. The house was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something was hiding inside it. Down the hallway, in the security room, screens began to light up one by one. And somewhere in the footage from earlier that morning, a door opened. Not the office. Not the nursery. The safe room corridor. And the person walking toward it wasn't Chloe. The security room was quiet except for the low hum of machines. Rows of screens glowed in the dim light, each one showing a different angle of the house Graham had believed he controlled completely. Graham stood behind the security desk, Caleb still resting against his shoulder, Owen now asleep in the nursery under the watch of a monitor. He hadn't planned to come down here himself. But something in his chest wouldn't let him sit and wait. "Play it again," he said. The guard nodded and rewound the footage. The timestamp showed earlier that morning. The hallway outside the safe room came into view. Empty, still, exactly the way Graham liked it. Then the door at the end of the corridor opened. Someone stepped inside. Graham's breath slowed. It wasn't Chloe. The uniform was gray. The posture straight. The walk calm, familiar. Mrs. Hargrove. She moved down the hallway without hesitation, like someone who belonged there. She stopped outside the office, looked once over her shoulder, then entered. The screen went still again. No rush. No fear. No sign of someone doing anything wrong. Graham stared at the image, his mind trying to catch up with what his eyes already understood. "How long was she in there?" he asked quietly. The guard checked the timeline. 4 minutes, sir. 4 minutes. Long enough. The room felt colder. "Continue," Graham said. The footage moved forward. Mrs. Hargrove came back out, closed the office door behind her, and walked away at the same steady pace. No panic. No hesitation. No one following her. The timestamp matched the time Chloe had been feeding the twins in the nursery. Graham knew because he had reviewed that routine himself. He didn't speak for a long time. Caleb stirred slightly against his shoulder, his small fingers gripping the fabric of Graham's shirt. The guard shifted in his chair. "Sir, should I notify?" "No," Graham said quietly. The word came out firm. Too firm. Because this wasn't just theft. This was something deeper. Something personal. Graham turned away from the screens slowly. Every step back toward the main house felt heavier than the last. When he entered the living room again, the space looked the same. The same furniture. The same clean lines. The same silence. But now it felt different. Because the trust he had built this house on had just cracked. Mrs. Hargrove stood near the window, hands folded, her expression calm when he walked in. "Did security find anything?" she asked gently. Graham studied her face. 15 years. She had worked for the family before the twins were born. Before Diane got sick. She had organized meals, managed staff, kept the house running when everything else fell apart. He had trusted her without question. "We found something," Graham said. Her expression didn't change. "What was it?" Graham walked past her slowly and set Caleb down in the playpen nearby. The boy was awake now, watching him with quiet eyes. Then Graham turned back. "The camera in the safe corridor is working," he said. Mrs. Hargrove's fingers tightened slightly. "I thought you said it wasn't." "I checked with maintenance," Graham continued calmly. "They never received a repair request." The silence stretched. Mrs. Hargrove's face remained composed, but something behind her eyes shifted. "That's strange," she said carefully. "There must have been a misunderstanding." Graham held her gaze. "We also reviewed the footage." Another pause. "And?" she asked. Graham didn't answer right away, because the moment felt bigger than the words. In the playpen, Caleb pulled himself up slowly, his small hands gripping the rail. His legs trembled, but he stayed standing. Graham watched him for a second. Then he looked back at Mrs. Hargrove. "You went into my office this morning." It wasn't a question. Her lips parted slightly. "I told you I placed documents on your desk." "For 4 minutes?" Graham asked quietly. Her composure slipped for the first time. "I may have been organizing." "The safe was opened," he said. The words landed hard. Mrs. Hargrove went very still. "I would never." "The brooch," Graham continued. "Where is it?" The room went silent. Outside, sunlight shifted across the floor. Inside, the air felt tight. Mrs. Hargrove's voice came slower now. "Sir, are you accusing me?" Graham didn't raise his voice. Didn't step closer. Didn't show anger. That calm was worse. "I'm asking you once," he said. "Where is it?" Her eyes moved, just for a second, toward the hallway, then back to him. "I don't have it." Graham watched her carefully. Because now, after the footage, after Chloe's quiet dignity, after the drawing in his pocket, he wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. "You were very certain about Chloe," he said. "I was protecting this house. You told me poor people see opportunity where trust is given." Mrs. Hargrove's chin lifted slightly. "That's reality." Graham's voice stayed quiet. "No," he said. "That was your story." The words landed like a crack in glass. For the first time, uncertainty showed on her face. Before she could answer, Caleb lost his balance. His legs gave out. He fell back into the playpen with a soft thud and a startled cry. Graham moved instantly, lifting him, holding him close. Caleb clung to him, his small face pressing into Graham's shoulder. And in that moment, something became painfully clear. All the fear, all the suspicion, all the control. It hadn't been protecting this house. It had been protecting a lie. Graham looked at Mrs. Hargrove again. His voice was steady. "Security is searching staff quarters," he said. Her face went pale. "And if they find it there," he continued quietly, "we're going to have a very different conversation." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to break. Mrs. Hargrove stood perfectly still, but her hands were no longer steady. And somewhere deep inside the mansion, a drawer was about to be opened. Minutes passed like hours. Graham stood in the living room, Caleb resting against his shoulder, the child's breathing warm and uneven against his neck. Across the room, Mrs. Hargrove remained where she was, her posture straight, but the calm confidence she had carried for years was gone. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then 2 security staff appeared at the doorway. One of them held something carefully in a white cloth. Graham didn't need to see it up close to know. But he walked forward anyway. The cloth opened. The diamond butterfly brooch caught the light, its wings flashing the same soft shimmer Diane used to smile at in the mirror. For a moment, the room disappeared. He saw Diane laughing. He saw her pinning it to her dress. He heard her voice saying, "It's beautiful, Graham, but you didn't have to spend so much." The memory hit his chest like a wave. Then the present came back. Where was it? Graham asked quietly. The guard glanced toward Mrs. Hargrove before answering. "In her dresser, sir, wrapped inside a hand towel." The silence that followed felt heavy and final. Mrs. Hargrove's lips parted, but no words came. Her shoulders, always straight, slowly lowered. "I was going to return it," she said finally, her voice thin. "I only wanted you to see what she was capable of." Graham looked at her. "What she was capable of?" he repeated. Mrs. Hargrove swallowed. That girl was changing everything. The noise, the mess, the way the boys clung to her. You were losing control. This house was losing order. Her eyes filled with something close to desperation. "I've kept this family running for 15 years. I protected your wife when she was sick. I protected you after she passed. I wasn't going to let some poor outsider walk in and replace what this house is supposed to be." Graham's voice stayed calm. "She wasn't replacing anything," he said. "She was bringing it back." Mrs. Hargrove shook her head. "People like her don't belong in homes like this." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Graham heard them clearly. Not concern, not loyalty, fear, control, judgment. He looked down at Caleb, who had fallen asleep against him again, one small hand gripping his shirt like he was afraid to let go. Then Graham spoke quietly. "You didn't protect this house," he said. "You poisoned it." Mrs. Hargrove closed her eyes. Security stepped forward. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. As they walked her toward the hallway, the mansion felt strangely lighter, like something heavy had finally been carried out. The door closed behind her, and the silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. It felt honest. Graham stood there for a long time, the brooch still in his hand. Then he looked at the time. Chloe had left less than an hour ago. He handed Caleb gently to the house nurse and picked up his keys. The drive across the city took 20 minutes. The neighborhoods changed slowly. Wide streets became narrow ones. Perfect lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks. Large homes became small buildings, close together, worn but alive. Graham parked in front of a modest apartment building and sat there for a moment. For the first time in a long time, he felt nervous. He walked up the stairs and knocked. It took a few seconds. Then the door opened. Chloe stood there, her duffel bag still near the wall, like she hadn't fully unpacked. When she saw him, her expression tightened. "Sir, I didn't take anything," she said immediately. "I know," Graham answered. She froze. He held out the brooch. "It was never you." Chloe stared at it, then back at him. Relief crossed her face, followed quickly by something more guarded. "I'm sorry," Graham said. The words came slowly, but they were real. "I believed the worst about you. I let fear speak louder than what I was seeing with my own eyes." Chloe didn't respond right away. From inside the apartment, the sound of a television played softly. The space behind her was small, simple, but clean. "I was wrong," Graham continued. "About you. About what my boys need." Her voice came quiet. "They don't need me, sir. They need you." Graham nodded. "I know," he said. "And I'm trying to learn how to be that for them." A long silence passed. Then he added softly, "But they also need someone who already knows how to love them without fear." Chloe's eyes filled slightly. "I can't promise you perfection," she said. "I don't want perfection," Graham answered. "I want laughter in my house again." Another quiet moment. Then Chloe asked, carefully, "Are you sure? Because love isn't quiet. It's messy." Graham gave the smallest smile. "Then I guess it's time my house learned how to be a home again." That evening, the mansion sounded different. There were toys on the floor, sunlight through open curtains, and laughter. Real laughter. Owen sat on the rug banging blocks together. Caleb stood between Chloe and Graham, his small hands stretched toward his father. "Come on, buddy," Graham said softly, kneeling down. "I've got you." Caleb took one shaky step, then another, and fell forward into Graham's arms. For a second, the room went still. Graham held him close, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." That was the moment everything changed. Because wealth could build a mansion, but love was what finally made it a home. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more stories about faith, family, and second chances. And tell us in the comments, what part of the world are you watching from?